You are listening to Insights from the Conference Board.
Hello, my name is Robin Erickson, and I'm a principal researcher in the Human Capital Center at the Conference Board. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Insights. As offices begin to reopen and we head into the next new normal, we realize that the tumultuous events of 2020 and 2021 have changed the way we work forever. Virtually every employee in America and across the globe experienced a dramatic change in their work lives and at the same time faced new challenges in their personal lives, from health concerns to economic uncertainty to isolation from family and friends. Here at the Conference Board, we believe remote work has become one of the lasting legacies of the pandemic. And on top of this, several incidents since the start of the pandemic brought back a heightened awareness of racial injustice and a renewed employer focus on committing to address diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today, my colleague and co-author, Barbara Lombardo, is joining me to share the 6 lessons that we learned from organizations that managed to find a balance between fostering a positive employee experience and managing to increase the productivity of their employees during 2020 and the first part of 2021. Hi, Barbara. Could you start us off with why this topic is so important moving into the future of the workplace?
Sure, Robin. I'm happy to. In our September 2020 Reimagined Workplace Survey, 60% of respondents reported increases in perceived productivity since the beginning of the pandemic, but most respondents also reported deteriorating employee experience in terms of increased burnout or more hours worked or decreases in work-life balance. This suggested that productivity gains were being achieved at the expense of the employee experience, which was a really troubling observation for us. So in this report, we wanted to help organizations ensure that both their employee experience and productivity levels thrive as they reconsider their talent strategies going forward.
Thank you, Barbara. And so then please tell our listeners about the study methodology and how we discovered the 6 lessons.
Absolutely. The 6 lessons we describe in this report are based on 7 interviews we held with thriving companies, which is our name for those companies that reported both increased productivity and enhanced employee experience. The 6 lessons emerged as the most common practices among these thriving companies. In addition, we also leveraged quantitative data from the 3rd Reimagined Workplace Survey that was conducted in April of 2021.
So now that Barbara's described the report's methodology, I'd like to give all of our listeners a simple preview of the 6 lessons that we believe fostered success for thriving organizations. And the first 3 actually sound a little bit like Robert Fulghum's book, Everything I Ever Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, because the first 3 could be roughly summarized as trust, communicate, and care. The first one is trust and offer flexibility. The second is communicate frequently and transparently. The third is to make genuine caring a priority. And that's personally my favorite lesson because I've been studying retention for the last 20 years and have long believed that if organizations demonstrated their care for their employees more, they would have they'd be better able to retain them. The last 3 lessons, the 4th is to commit to inclusion. And that's especially important, as I mentioned, given all of the tumultuous events that happened in 2020 and 2021. The 5th lesson is to amplify mission and purpose. And the 6th is to see opportunity in crisis and be agile. And so during today's podcast, we're going to go through these 6 lessons. So Barbara, please start us off with the first lesson about trust and offer flexibility.
So one of the themes that emerged from our research dealt with how organizational cultures shifted in their approach to the relationship between employees and their work. Since the pandemic, providing employees with flexibility about when and how they do their job became more of a focus for over 80% of the organizations we surveyed in the April 2021 survey that I mentioned. And flexibility is grounded in trust. I don't think that companies can truly offer flexibility to their employees unless they trust them. So the most thriving organizations trusted their employees to make good decisions about where and when and how they performed their work. They focused on outcomes rather than inputs. They provided employees with flexibility and trust, which in turn fostered productivity and enhanced the employee experience. In effect, they created a virtuous cycle where increased employee experience led to higher levels of productivity, which in turn can produce a more enhanced employee experience. To give you just one example, one large nonprofit among the thriving organizations that we interviewed allowed their employees complete control to choose the hours they worked. While we know not all organizations can do that, given the nature of their work, we do believe that going into the future, we predict that the most successful organizations will be those that support and effectively manage the diverse needs of their workforce in terms of where and when work gets performed. And I think an important aspect of that, which you'll hear throughout our podcast this morning, is recognizing there's no one solution that works for all employees.
Definitely agree, Barbara. In fact, I think the interesting thing is to see how organizations can take these 6 lessons and take pieces of them, the ones that would work best for their organizations. And that first lesson that you just described is critically important, given all the reports that we're seeing in the press about employees not wanting to return to the workplace. So many organizations are starting to use their flexible and remote work policies as part of their employment value proposition to attract and retain employees. So then that leads us on to the next lesson, number 2, communicate frequently and transparently. One of the organizations that we interviewed said that they increased trust through communication itself. So you can see why we ordered these the way we did. According to our April 2021 survey of HR leaders, over 2/3 of the organizations that we surveyed indicated that their companies increased their focus on creating robust, consistent, and aligned communication strategies on a regular basis. More than half of the surveyed organizations reported that their leaders and managers engaged in regular two-way dialogue with employees through town halls and skip-level meetings. And one of the HR leaders that we interviewed said that their company now employs more frequent and transparent communication, especially around well-being and mental health. So the second lesson seems closely related to our next one, to make genuine caring a priority. So Barbara, why don't you walk us through that lesson?
Sure, Robin. And I know, as you said, this is your personal favorite, to make genuine caring a priority. For over 3/4 of organizations surveyed in our research, addressing well-being and safety of employees became more of a focus since the onset of the pandemic. Leaders responded to employee wellness needs in all kinds of ways, providing support that ranged from increased well-being initiatives to revised work-from-home policies. All of the organizations we interviewed, interestingly, instructed their leaders and managers to engage in regular check-in calls with their employees and make sure they were doing well, had the resources they needed, and felt connected with the company. And I think related to the theme Robin just addressed of communicating frequently and transparently, these leaders and managers made sure that they listened. These thriving organizations also augmented their well-being programs in anticipation of increased stress and anxiety, which increased really exponentially during the pandemic. Interviewed HR leaders spoke openly about caring for their employees, using that word more and more. And several companies even incorporated caring into their mottos, such as grace and space. And we can't be at our best if you can't be at your best. For those listeners interested in mental health and well-being in the workplace, the Conference Boards recently released another report titled Holistic Well-Being at Work that discusses how organizations can create integrated efforts and communications around all the many aspects of employee well-being to help their workers at all levels manage stress, engage, and adjust to change. And again, one theme I think that runs throughout many of these lessons is don't assume what employees need. It's not monolithic, it's diverse. So ask.
It definitely couldn't agree more, Barbara, especially when you think about a topic that we used to talk about in terms of retention and engagement, which were stay interviews. This is taking the idea of stay interviews to a whole other level, which is that managers need to be talking individually to each of their employees and just finding out how they're doing. So, and I think that making genuine caring a priority actually leads us into our fourth lesson, which is to commit to inclusion. And if you're interested in something that we've just written about, the Conference Board released a research report at the end of 2020 titled Even Higher Expectations in a Post-2020 World, How Organizations Engage with Social Change. And this provides us with global data related to the growing expectations by employees about the role organizations play in social change conversations. In fact, we actually cite some research there that shows that employees actually trust their organizations more than the government. But after the death of George Floyd in police custody during the early months of the pandemic, we saw extensive protests, and many organizations were prompted to respond and amplify their focus on DEI. In the April 2021 Workplace Reimagined survey, we found that 59% of the surveyed organizations increased their focus on providing stronger support, guidance, and coaching for leaders and managers with the goal of helping them create an inclusive environment. That actually was one of the higher percentages when we asked the organizations about what they were doing in terms of their organizational culture. And 43% of those surveyed organizations increased their encouragement of employees to bring their full selves to work. So what should organizations be doing? So organizations that commit to inclusion recognize the diverse needs and experiences among their employees and in turn consciously work to develop equitable solutions. By focusing on workplace inclusion, employees are gifted with a working environment that makes employees from all backgrounds feel respected and valued. One of the HR leaders that we interviewed made a simple but powerful statement. When we create an inclusive environment where people can bring their whole selves to work, our business thrives. And so that's why we included this lesson, because we do believe it's critically important as organizations are rethinking their talent strategies right now. So with that, Barbara, please share the fifth lesson with the audience.
Sure, Robin. And first, I want to preface that with an observation that you and I talked about throughout our research. I think one thing we recognized is that the pandemic and all the other things that happened in 2020 and 2021 didn't start these trends that we're describing, but they accelerated trends that were already in motion. And I think this next lesson is especially indicative of that, amplifying mission and purpose. So in our April 2021 survey, 45% of HR leaders surveyed indicated that since the onset of the pandemic, they had placed a greater focus on ensuring that mission, vision, and values are understood and widely championed. That's almost half of all respondents saying that this became an increased priority. That amplified focus on purpose and mission provided many companies with a kind of unifying force for their employees who were often stressed and remote and widely geographically dispersed. We also found that 36% of surveyed organizations increased their focus on a widespread basic assumption that the organization exists to benefit employees, customers, stakeholders, and communities. And that's in really stark contrast to a long-held belief that the purpose of the company or the organization was a focus on shareholders. So that shift to a purpose-driven organization has been occurring for quite a while, and we saw it reflected in the revision of the Business Roundtable's definition of the purpose of a corporation in 2019. But you really saw it accelerated by the pandemic. So for a couple of examples, one HR leader explained to us how their CEOs, and they called it distillation of purpose into the words care and compete, was critical to their success during 2020 and into 2021, both in the marketplace and in addressing the well-being of their employees. One other example, an HR leader of a multinational beverage corporation attributed much of their success throughout the pandemic to being a purpose-led organization and their leadership's conscious effort to bring purpose back to the forefront.
Thank you, Barbara, for that. That brings us to our last lesson, learned by organizations that thrived through the crises of 2020 and 2021. That is to see opportunity in crisis and be agile. And as Barbara mentioned, the idea of acceleration actually comes through in this lesson as well. The crisis that we saw proved that organizations need to be ready to seize opportunities and continue to evolve with ever-changing obstacles. And the Conference Board's yearly C-Suite Challenge report found that U.S. CEOs recognized seeing crisis as an opportunity for change as the second most critical lesson they had learned from navigating the crises of 2020. So one of the U.S. CEOs responded to the C-suite challenge with the following statement, and that is that business models must be constantly assessed, redesigned, and evolved at warp speed. And that's that idea of acceleration again. But by maintaining this mindset, organizations can take advantage of the opportunities in front of them to make major changes and improve their overall organizational strategies. For many thriving companies that we interviewed, the major disruptions to the working model in 2020 gave them the chance to accelerate changes that they had already begun. For example, an HR leader that we interviewed related to us how the events of 2020 and early 2021 allowed them to advance the new culture model that was already in progress. And it featured an agile and interdependent workforce. So definitely saw that there was many of the organizations that took the transformations that they were already doing and pushed them forward because they saw that they could continue to make those changes. And just in terms of overall transformation, one of the things that we found in the survey is we asked, in the April 2021 survey, we asked how many of the organization's organizational cultures had changed in the previous 12 months. And we found that almost 50% of the organization said that their culture had changed. Well, if you know about culture change, you know that most of the time it takes a lot of leadership buy-in, a lot of meetings, a lot of, oftentimes consultants, takes a lot of cascading communications, and it typically takes 2 to 3 years. So the fact that almost half of the organizations that we surveyed said that their culture had changed in 12 months, we thought was significant. So just sort of reinforces this last lesson. So, Barbara, any concluding thoughts for our listeners?
I do have one, Robin, that I'd like to share, and it's about one other aspect of our report. These 6 lessons highlight the practices that some organizations that had thrived during 2020 and 2021 were implementing. As your organization is rethinking its talent strategy, and we believe that almost all organizations are doing so as we enter into this next phase, we recommend that you look at the report's conclusion, where we provide a list of questions to consider at 3 different levels: at the organizational level, at the level of leadership and management, and then at the employee level.
Thank you so much for that, Barbara. And thank you for joining me today with this and for all of the work that we were able to get done with this report. I hope that our listeners have enjoyed today's podcast and are taking away some tangible steps to positively affect organizational culture and employee experience as we all move into the reimagined workplace. Thank you again for joining us. If you'd like to find out more about any of the topics or research discussed, please visit our website at tcb.org/podcasts or /webcasts for more interactive programs. And our podcasts are also available wherever you tune in, like iTunes or Spotify. So thanks again and goodbye.
This has been Insights from the Conference Board.